All right, y'all, welcome back. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. Next up is John Glaser, assistant editor at antiwar.com. And man, he's been setting the blog on fire over the last few months. It's so good to have you on that blog and on this show. Welcome back, John. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
I'm very happy to have you here. I was wondering if you could teach us a little bit about Barack Obama's war on behalf of democracy and freedom in Bahrain. How's that going?
Yeah, well, it was interesting when Obama got word of Muammar Gadhafi's execution, the one where they beat him and dragged him on the ground and kicked him in the head, and allegedly now perhaps stabbed him, sodomized him with a combat knife, and then shot him in the head. When he got word of that incident, he used it as an opportunity to say, this is, good for the Arab Spring. It's another dictator down, and this is a warning to other dictators in the region. You can't last for long, which is an interesting thing for him to have said, considering that he vehemently and enthusiastically supports many of these dictators. And Bahrain, as you point out, is a perfectly good example. Recently, like last month, the State Department issued, in the way that they're required to, a notification about their plan to send Bahrain $53 million worth of arms and weaponry and military training and equipment. So this is just the latest in that. They've done it many, many times in the past. In fact, they've armed, for the most part, all of Bahrain's government. But they had to do this notification, and it was reaching finalization just last week or 2 weeks ago, and overwhelming international condemnation as well as pressure here at home from human rights groups pushed that to a temporary hold. So that is on hold because, of course, it's understood very clearly that the Bahraini government is going to continue to use such weaponry provided by the U.S. against its own citizens. This has been going on, especially since February, when Arab Spring protests had open live rounds opened on them from security forces in Bahrain, and the situation doesn't seem to be getting any better. But that's sort of the status quo in Bahrain. So this lie about Obama supporting democracy and development in the Middle East is belied by his relationship with the Bahraini dictatorship.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I remember the way this thing started, the protesters, when they occupied Pearl Square, it was really a roundabout there, a round square. What they said was, hey, we would like for you to stay the king, your highness, but we would like a constitutional monarchy where we can pretend there's some semblance of law. Would that please be okay? That was more or less where this thing started.
That's precisely right, and they did it peacefully, and they were asking for civil government. They were asking for the rule of law. And that's in contrast, by the way, to Bahrain's recent history pre-Arab Spring, where they have been known to torture and illegally detain and do things the way that dictatorships do. These Bahrainis were just peacefully, non-violently asking for a country in which they couldn't be abused. But American influence is influencing that small country, that small government of that small country, very, very much in the direction of maintained dictatorship. Because if the population in Bahrain gets too much control, if policy starts to reflect the will of the people there, Washington won't get its way in the Gulf. And that's very important to Obama and his minions.
All right, well, anyway, so can you tell us a little bit about the police-state crackdown as far as, what's happened to the protesters? And, of course, a big part of that is the doctors who treated the wounded protesters. One thing I read recently said they're going to get new trials since originally they were all just sentenced to solitary confinement for decades for daring to treat the wounded.
That's right. So initially, scores of doctors and nurses were arrested for the crime of treating as patients those protesters who had been injured by government security forces. And this has been condemned by the international community and various human rights groups, and they've been putting a lot of pressure on the Bahraini government to actually, do something about this. And you're right. Recently, they have called for a retrial in which these medical professionals will get another chance at freedom for not committing any crime at all. But the story gets ugly if you dig a little deeper, because while these medical professionals were in custody, many of them who were detained came out and claimed that they had been tortured, beaten, hit with electrical cables, and so on and so forth. In fact, a princess in Bahrain is specifically pointed out as one of the sort of torturers in chief in these Bahraini prisons. And it doesn't seem like the Bahraini government is going to, push for some accountability for the people who were tortured and so on and so forth. So that's ugly. Furthermore, despite the fact that we don't hear about it too much in the media, there are daily protests in Bahrain. I mean, daily people and nightly people are going onto the streets to protest. And it wasn't so long ago that a tear gas canister was shot and it hit a boy in the head, a 16-year-old boy, I believe, and he died. And his family is not getting any justice. And that sort of thing happens every once in a while. A little over 30 people have been killed directly by security forces, and hundreds more, maybe thousands injured. So that's a little taste of how things are on the ground. But the problem is the Bahraini government actually also jailed about 40 to 50 people when in last month they had by-elections, because the people were pushing for by-elections to actually put some people that actually they feel represent them into parliament. And it was basically a show, and the opposition parties boycotted it, and so therefore they had no chance at putting in people with voices, and so they just arrested people as a part of the opposition who boycotted. So that's a little taste of how things are on the ground over there, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, they're not much different than the New York Times, where the whole spin is that the Crown Prince, who's in charge of all of this persecution, he's the Western leading Democratic moderate type who we can work with, who's really not so bad. It's the king who's doing all this brutalization. Right.
That's the typical evasive tone from the New York Times. Yeah.
It really is amazing. Well, back when this goes in the category, I guess, of like Justin was saying in his recent article, that evil makes you stupid, where like Lindsey Graham doesn't know that he's not supposed to say on TV that, yes, now we'll steal all their oil, about Libya. And Admiral Mullen made the same mistake in saying that the difference between Libya, where we're intervening supposedly on the side of the little guy against the dictator, and Bahrain is that Bahrain is our ally. And I guess he could have added, Gadhafi's expendable for our PR stunt. Anyway, we're going to pick up right there when we get back from this with John Glaser. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with John Glaser, assistant editor at antiwar.com. You can find him at news.antiwar.com. He's keeping Jason Ditt's company over there and tearing it up at all times at antiwar.com/blog. I urge you to just go ahead and make that one of your home tabs. Why not? I would. I do. It is. All right, now, you wrote a little review, John, of Michael Hastings' new piece in Rolling Stone, which I don't want to talk about so much, but I want to talk about this part of it. Hillary Clinton, quote, "We didn't get off to such a great start with Egypt. Let's reverse that with Libya." Now, it doesn't have everything that I would, have crammed in there in it, but I'm pretty sure more or less what that means is Scott Horton is right, and was right, that the reason America intervened in Libya wasn't because there was anything wrong with Gadhafi. In fact, he was even willing to buy weapons from America and everything else. But he was expendable, and they needed to change the narrative from America is obviously the bad guy in Egypt to America's on the side of the little guy against the evil dictator in Libya. And so that was the final argument that convinced Clinton to support this war, apparently, was, as I guessed back then, for the PR's sake, in order to confuse the narrative from America's the bad guy in each and every one of these revolutions.
That's right. I think that it's clear, and you actually were the first one that I heard to put forth this theory, and it plays out as a result of as revealed by Hastings' report, which I have problems with, as you know. But yeah, I mean, the problem with that narrative is that it's going to war for PR purposes. It's going to war in order to overshadow your incessant, unceasing, and committed support for tyranny in other parts of that region. And that's really the big problem with the Libya intervention. Especially, I mean, we don't even need to get into the fact that the NTC and their rebel fighters are not exactly the poster boys for democracy in the region.
They're torturers and rapists and murderers is what they are.
That's right. It was just last week, right after the execution, in fact, of Gadhafi, that they found 53 pro-Gadhafi loyalists who had been executed in a hotel that was under NTC control. They had their hands bound behind their back, and many of them had a shot to the head.
Well, and I talked to David Enders on this show where he was in the refugee camp interviewing the women who said, yeah, they come and grab women at night by the dozens and rape them.
Yeah, they're bad guys. And it takes a lot of propaganda to actually torque this intervention into sort of a pro-Arab Spring, pro-democracy light. But the evidence is not just belied in Bahrain. We have to think, the evidence is also belied, notably in Yemen, which is, even worse. Atrocities have been happening in Yemen than have been happening in Bahrain. People, just in the past week or two, up to 70 people have been killed, and that's just in the last week or two. And over the month, it's been, in the high hundreds. Largely peaceful protests there as well, although there are tribal elements fighting each other. But, there was a lot of pressure in the same way that there is in Bahrain to stop supporting Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president of Yemen. And he's still using our weapons against his people, by the way. But after the Al-Awlaki killing, it was amazing to see Obama administration officials again, they had been dormant for a while, but again come out and heap loads of praise on the Yemeni administration and regime for allowing them to, help in the fight against terrorism and allowing them to kill an American citizen without due process. So now he's back to being a great guy. And it's worth pointing out that Yemen still has $120 million allocated to them for the request of the fiscal year 2012 budget. That's comparable amounts were last year and this year and the year before that. In 2005, we sent them tens of millions of dollars of military equipment, complete with shotguns, machine guns, sniper rifles, which they, by the way, have been putting snipers on top of buildings that align the streets of Arab Spring protesters and opening fire, live rounds. We're not talking rubber bullets here. Yemen is another example of Obama's, strong commitment to tyranny and despotism and state terror. And it doesn't even end there. We can go to Egypt and realize the fact
let's stay on Yemen for a second here, because I think it's worth pointing out, without, having been there and knowing everything about it, it's at least likely or quite plausible, I would say, that the only reason that the Saleh government is able to hang on to power is because of American aid. He's got the Houthi rebellion in the north, he's got the socialist rebellion in the south, and then in the capital city, they hate his guts too. I mean, what does this guy have going for him other than American money and American arms, John?
You're largely correct, because he has such a weak administration, and for a while he was even out of the country receiving medical treatment for wounds he took during an attempted assassination in Sana'a. But you're pretty much right. There is a support base in the northern part of the capital, which is, they're part of his tribe, which goes back, generations. But they support him because, they get guns and butter from his being in power. And they're a very, very small portion of the entire country, most of whom does not want him to be president. There's opposition tribes, there's the Houthi rebellion, and then there's this massive popular protest against his rule, many of whom are young, democratically minded people. The winner of the most recent Nobel Peace Prize, a woman whose name I have trouble with, Tawakkul Karman, just won the Nobel Peace Prize. She's been on the streets in Yemen since the beginning, and her and many, many others like her are just a youthful, peaceful revolution that want to see accountability and civil government and rule of law and stop having such a dictatorship. But again, as we see in Bahrain, in Yemen, U.S. influence, guns and butter, are too strong to allow a democratic process to arise. Mm-hmm. And Obama is he's barely even suffering any criticism from this sort of dictatorial policy in the media. He still has supporters who claim, he's a champion of human rights and all this. It's disheartening to see such people, such an ignoring attitude towards the unfortunate realities of his presidency.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to reemphasize very quickly what you said about how after they allowed the assassination of the American citizen preacher al-Awlaki in their country, the administration, I believe it was Obama himself and the Secretary of State, Clinton, both lavishly praised the dictator Saleh, absolutely shameless, completely just ignoring the reality of, his role in crushing the Arab Spring there.
That's right. Obama, I'll quote him. He said, "This success being assassinating an American citizen without any due process, this success is a tribute to our intelligence community and to the efforts of Yemen and its security forces, who have worked closely with the United States over the course of several years." You bet, buddy. Yeah, he's been working closely with you, and you've been working closely with them.
Yeah, I'd like to see the WikiLeaks on American advisors helping them with their crowd control and putting down this rebellion, too. It wouldn't surprise me one bit.
That's exactly right. This generalizes throughout the region, unfortunately. And Obama wasn't the only one that day to praise Saleh. It came from the State Department and Hillary Clinton as well. So
right, now,
you're exactly right.
Let me ask you real quick. Is it okay if I keep you one more segment here after the top of the hour break? Because I did want to let you elaborate about Egypt, and I see your new piece about Uzbekistan here at antiwar.com/blog I'd like to talk about with you as well.
Sure thing.
Yeah, America, we're the light of liberty coming at you with the J-Dam. Oh, by the way, I guess I'll go ahead and squeak in here before the music starts playing. If people go back to 2009 when Obama lied and said the beginning of the end of the Afghan war would be this last July, he also, in his West Point speech, said at the end, by the way, Yemen and Somalia, you're next. And in fact, he'd been bombing them, as we'd been reporting at antiwar.com for weeks, and continued bombing them for weeks, leading up to the attempted Christmas Day attack where Abdul Muttalib supposedly was put on the plane in Yemen in the first place. So maybe a little bit of a lesson in blowback for you there. You can read Amnesty about the cluster bombs and the children that died. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and lucky me, John Glaser, staying on the line for one more segment here. He's our assistant editor at antiwar.com. You can find him on the blog mostly, and also at news.antiwar.com. And you were switching over to Egypt, and I interrupted you and made you stay on Yemen for a minute. So let's go ahead and talk about America's democracy and liberty promotion in Egypt for a little bit here.
Well, Egypt, of course, if we know the history of U.S. relationship with Egypt, we know it's not very much different from that with Yemen and Bahrain. Mubarak was a terrible dictator, blah, blah, blah. We all know that. But there was a real chance, and the Obama administration continued to support Mubarak right to the very end until it was impossible to do so any further. Egyptians ousted him, and now he's standing trial. But Egyptian democracy is just not a sure thing right now. And there are a couple of reasons for it, but one of the main ones is that America continues to support the ruling military council, which has made bad on its promises things like repealing the emergency law, which cracks down on press freedoms and political freedoms and free speech freedoms, speaking bad of the leaders and so on and so forth. So what we see is continuing abuses. Some of them are just isolated, but some of them are more fundamental to the transition in Egypt right now. And again, there are real reasons for it. Namely, if the people gain enough legitimacy in the political sphere over there, the policies will start to reflect what they want, and that is unacceptable to Washington. Policies like, subservience to Israel, policies like giving prominence to American investment in that country, things like rendition, which who knows, the extent to which that's still going on or the extent to which it will be re-upped in the future. Egypt would be a good ally to have to help torture people. So this is sort of the status quo in Egypt, and we sort of have to wait to see how long it'll be before progress actually starts to take hold. I'm actually cautiously optimistic, but I did want to mention Uzbekistan, who I've been looking at it recently, and it sort of encapsulates what our whole conversation has been about, and what it sort of encapsulates the Obama administration's foreign policy, even with regard to the Arab Spring, even though there doesn't seem to be many Arab Spring protesters in Uzbekistan. It's a Central Asian dictatorship. It's one of the worst in the world. The Bush administration supported it handsomely in order to supply American troops in Afghanistan with military equipment and the rest of it. And we set up bases there and so on and so forth. But in 2004, 2005, international condemnation forced a sort of souring of the U.S. relationship with Uzbekistan. But lately, the Obama administration, I should say that Uzbekistan is probably even a worse dictatorship than Bahrain or Yemen. The guy is notorious. The president there, Islam Karimov, is notorious for boiling people alive and raping them with broken bottles. This is what he does to his prisoners. And it's anyone who speaks poorly of him could be a prisoner. We should keep in mind. The State Department, even just recently, issued their latest sort of report on Uzbekistan. They said they condemned him for torture, mistreatment of detainees, illegal detention, arbitrary arrest, denial of due process, restrictions on freedom of speech. You can go on and on and on. Harassment of religious minority groups. Yet, the Obama administration has been cozying back up to that dictator so that they can better execute the Afghan war because, they've had souring relationships with Pakistan. But Hillary Clinton just got back from a trip with Karimov where she was supposedly, the media praised her for sticking it to him and, chastising him on how brutal he is and saying, hey, if you want more support from us, which he's already getting because they lifted sanctions which allow the resumption of U.S. military foreign sales to that country. But, she supposedly chided him for all the human rights violations, which is not true at all. She just went there to show her support and renew the relationship between the U.S. and that horrible dictator. But this is the problem. We already mentioned the fact that Obama supporters and even most sort of moderate Americans who don't pay that much attention don't give him any flack for this. Obama's in the clear for all of this. But no one recognizes the contradiction between the Obama we heard about in 2008, who promised respect for human rights and transparent government and the change from the Bush years, and then hasn't. That's one thing. We've already mentioned that. But another thing that I just plainly don't understand is why this should be tolerated. Why should dictatorships be supported with guns and butter all around the world, from Latin America to the Middle East to Central Asia, and nobody do anything about it? Why should that be allowed? Why shouldn't the Obama administration and the main decision makers implementing these policies face trial? Why are these not indictable offenses? Why is it not an indictable offense to imprison the people of Yemen or the people of Uzbekistan and maintain a dictatorship over their heads when it's possible that they might get something else, something better, something more democratic, something more humanitarian? Why are these people not on trial? I mean, if I was paying some jerk bully on the playground to go beat up people and coerce them and make him steal money from them and so on and so forth, sort of a mini little playground dictator, I'd surely get in trouble for that. That's an indictable offense. I'd be in jail. Why in the world do the leaders of the free world, supposedly, the people heading the government in America, not get any flack, legal, moral, or otherwise, for these horrible, horrible policies, which imprison millions of innocent people?
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's just no accountability, and it's because of the unreality of the whole situation. It's like Carl Sagan used to talk about people just lost in the dark, grasping at superstition. They got no real ground to stand on to understand anything. There's an argument going on at Salon.com this week about whether America is an empire or not. 20 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, and we've been at war ever since. And now we're going to begin to argue about whether this is a liberal hegemony or a blood-soaked monster just like every other one that came before it. Come on. But that's where we are, John.
I saw that on Salon, and I saw the the TV segment on MSNBC. It's such a joke to see supposed experts on television trying to influence people's thoughts about how the world works and not recognize the fact that the American empire is in fact an empire. It's pathetic. I mean, it's a sad reflection of the intellectual culture that we have here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, you just basically defined empire. We have to support this tortured dictator who boils people to death so that we can have supply routes for our forever war in Afghanistan. That's about, a third of its lifespan through at 10 years right now.
That's right. And one of the things that P.J. Crowley said in defense of, the argument that we're not an empire, is that he said, we're drawing down in Iraq. An empire would have stayed in Iraq as much as they could. Well, first of all, the Obama administration did try to stay in Iraq as much as they could in violation of the deal that was scheduled for all of them to leave in December 2011. That was set up by the Bush administration. And it's obviously clear that we're not leaving. We have an expanded diplomatic presence there. We have thousands of military contractors, mercenaries.
Well, and if they were going to keep their tens of thousands of troops, they would have had to start the war all over again. That's what they're afraid of.
That's right.
But yeah,
we've accomplished our mission in Iraq, which is to make it a client state. That's why we're mostly drawing down.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're all out of time, but thank you very much for your time, especially for staying over with us, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
John Glaser, everybody. news.antiwar.com and antiwar.com/blog.